All right, welcome everyone to the Kubeskills community here. We have a special show for you. I'm super excited. If you're just joining in the chat, if you're just joining on YouTube, go ahead and say hello and where you're from. I'd love to hear from you in the chat. So let's get the conversation rolling. So welcome again, everyone, to the Kubeskills community, coming at you live here on YouTube on December 16th. Kubeskills is a community where everyone is welcome, can join and collaborate on learning the subjects of containers and Kubernetes. That's why we're here, right? That's why we're in the Kubeskills community. It's a community of about 200 people strong right now, and we all share our knowledge and try to get people going and on this Kubernetes bandwagon here, and trying to teach each other this complex topic, and that's really why we're here today, is to try to break down some of those complexities. We're joined by Josh Duffney today. He's a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft, author, writer, speaker. Check out his books at joshduffney.gumroad.com. Let me paste that in the chat here. And so joshduffney.gumroad.com. Got to give him his cred. So he's author of the book, one of my favorite books, Become Ansible, sorry, and How to Take Smart Notes in Obsidian. I've certainly learned a lot from him using Obsidian for taking notes as an engineer, which is pretty cool. Check out his posts at duffney.io/posts. And I will post that in the chat as well. And he's written articles on detaching from distraction, attention matters more than time, the digital declutter, and my favorite, note taking became a full-time job, so I stopped. And you certainly kind of get that vibe by reading your posts. So I appreciated that one as kind of a alternative. He also shares his learnings on his YouTube channel. So youtube.com/@Joshua Duffney. And so I encourage you to check that out. I've certainly watched all the episodes. And the thing about these videos, the thing that I like about it is that you insert a little bit of storytelling. There's a storytelling aspect to your videos, which kind of draws you in, right? Which I really appreciate. And couldn't help but mention his GitHub page and my favorite GitHub repo that he has, which is called Everything I Know About Go. So, yeah, Mr. Josh Duffney, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining. So good to have you.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm a big fan, and I've been following you for a few years now, and got the book Become Ansible back, shortly after it came out, and appreciate your way of explaining things, your way of kind of walking people through how to take some of these complex things like Ansible, like learning Go, like taking notes and learning, and we have this you're a fan of building the second brain, so we have this thing we refer to as capture, organize, distill, and express, which is our kind of way of note taking and kind of the personal knowledge management. So my question to you is, how did this all start for you? I know that you attribute a lot of your I guess findings, or maybe you just reference the book Taking Smart Notes. So where did it all begin for you, and could you tell us a little bit more about kind of how that all started?
Are you meaning the personal knowledge management journey? More
Yeah.
particular? Sure.
Yeah.
So that all kind of started because I had switched disciplines. So I had left Stack Overflow as an SRE, which I had worked for like 7 years in the DevOps space, and became a technical writer for originally Terraform and Ansible, given my expertise in that area, and then switched over to Go. but I was also trying to write my first nonfiction book at the same time. And so I was in this new discipline, and I was trying to write a book at the same time. And so I was just like completely overwhelmed with information, and I
Mm.
had no way to organize it. And so I kind of latched onto, it's interesting, some of the best books that I have, like I'll have been recommended 5 years prior, a couple of years prior, and then I'll finally pick them up. And it's a good thing I delayed it. I kind of kicked myself that I didn't pick it up sooner. But anyway, Smart Notes came up in kind of that, it came up just, I stumbled upon it on Twitter or something, or maybe it was recommended on Amazon, and it promised a system, right? Because I have an engineering background, so it promised a system for my writing, and so I dove like headfirst into that, and spent probably way too many cycles trying to like engineer a perfect system in that, which we can get into later. Why that's kind of why you can over engineer those things, and
Mm.
it'll be more of a problem. But really, the crux of it was I was just like suffering from so much information overload, and I felt like I needed to build some personal systems for myself to alleviate that. I've been doing that for years and years in operations work, where you build monitoring systems or you build these different ways to scale web servers and stuff to combat overload, right? And so like I found my own brain needed some kind of a system to prevent overload, and that's kind of where, that was kind of the motivation behind the research spike into those system building.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the things that kept me tuning back to your YouTube channel and really interested me about how you took some of these some of the aspects from the book and some of the aspects of uh, just personal knowledge management in general, and how you applied that from an engineering perspective. And you I think you call it the kind of engineer's daybook, or um, way of kind of laying out the day so that you're capturing things in real time. And this process of taking a fleeting note and converting that to a more permanent note. So I guess through that, how have you kind of filtered it down, or ciphered uh some of the more general personal knowledge management aspects, and things from the book, and how have you kind of distilled that down to how to use this system for engineering specifically?
Good question. So my system, it keeps evolving, but it's really a combination. It's an integration of a bunch of different things. So there's the smart notes aspect to it, which is really around knowledge building. That's where I think about it, because if you look at it, it's about, if you look at my videos on smart notes in particular, it's really around building knowledge blocks and connecting knowledge. And eventually, what will happen, especially in a technical discipline, is you will end up with something very much like the outline of a book, which is the whole point of the smart notes methodology. Is you are starting to build this domain of knowledge, and then it kind of like, all of a sudden you could write a book. It's kind of like the promise of that system, and it does work to a degree. But I realized that I needed to use that sparingly, because not everything could be translated into building a knowledge framework. At least not for me. It wasn't scalable for me. But then there's other aspects of like just managing your day. So the engineer's daybook is actually an idea that I got from the second edition of the Pragmatic Programmer, and that's very much just like an old mechanical or electrical engineer's notebook, where they have kind of just things that they're jotting down in notes. And it's mainly a scratch pad, right? That lets you kind of leverage the Zeigarnik effect. So if you look at anything with like knowledge management or task management, the Zeigarnik effect is going to be mentioned. And in a nutshell, that effect is we remember more of what we didn't finish than what we completed. So like the infamous study there is a waiter, the psychologist, I believe, that came up with this or discovered it, they were at a large table, and while they were being seated and waited on, the waiter could remember all their names. It was a big group, but as soon as they left, he had forgotten all of it because that task had been completed. And so you can use those scratch spaces or the engineer daybook as a way to kind of offload that from your mind, so you can kind of leave the day and refresh and shut down, which is part of Cal Newport's shutdown ritual. And so that's kind of another facet. And then there's like, how do I structure my day in the most optimal way, where I'm getting important stuff done, but I'm also not being irresponsible in leaving people hanging or letting things drop. And so that's where the time blocking kind of fits in. And so my system And what I've been doing is trying to find a tool that lets me incorporate and integrate all these different things into kind of one thing. And lately it's been Logseek has been the thing that I've stuck to the longest, but I've used Obsidian, I've used many other tools. So it's really been this constant exploration of these different tools that help me manage my time and energy and knowledge, and trying to put them into a system that I can maintain through software.
Yeah, that's interesting. I personally use Logseek for the engineer's daybook and the day to day, and then I find that when I have when I have those, at the end of the day, I have my shutdown routine. I find that there's something about converting that to Obsidian into a kind of a intermediary permanent note. So I'll take my notes during the day, convert them to Obsidian, which is kind of my first process of distilling. And then once I get it in Obsidian, I will then further distill it and put it into my slip box. So, so yeah, I feel like that separation, I guess, between, a lot of people say like, why don't you just use one, one for them all? I feel like
Yeah.
those different ones, using all of those separately, in my mind, I guess um, it's like taking, file and moving it from one folder to the other. That kind of that act for some reason for me is like very satisfying, and
Mhm.
coming from engineering background and being an engineer, um, I my mind very much works in kind of that folder hierarchy, right? Where you have, um, and this may go back to how I used to take notes, 4 or 5 years ago, where I would just have a file that at the top of the file, um, or the file name was the date. So it would be like 2022 12:02 or something like that, and I would just write all my notes from the day. And then the problem that I found with that is, you know, it would be somewhat searchable, but not really. And then also, what I wanted to ask you about was, a lot of times when you write things down as a fleeting note, you're at a conference writing the notes down from the speaker. You're reading a book, trying to take notes on the book. So in going back and kind of trying to reference that again without having that context, I find it really hard to um, go back to that note and say, okay, what was I really talking about? I sometimes my notes don't make sense. So have you come across that before? What is your process for, I guess, adding context to fleeting notes, and then making them permanent so that you go back to them in like a year or 2 years and they still have relevance to you?
That's a good question, and I'll kind of speak to like where I'm currently at. So I think we all, to use the engineering analogy, and anyone that's been in operations, there's the dev, there's the test, and then moves up to production, and like you can kind of use that mental model as a way to think about these different spaces. So we all need a dev space. We all need this space where we can dump ideas, just like if we were to open up a script file and start writing some code, and it's just saved on disk. It's not in Git. It's not checked anywhere. Because we want that friction to be really, really light. And so you want to have some kind of a system. It could be a pocket notebook. It could be a bullet journal. For me, it's Logseek because it gives me that daily journal every time, and I can use tags and stuff to switch and search. And so we all need that development environment. And then where I've been trying to refine that next step. So I've gone through pretty much every tool in the PKM space for that next step, which is the reference system. And so if you look at the original Smart Notes book and their website and tools, they have kind of recommendation of 3 tools. They have your reference system, your editor, and your slip box. And those are 3 separate things. For a lot of us, I think the difference between a reference system and a slip box is overkill, because a lot of the reference system in that context is for citation and stuff like that, which we don't have as much reason for. And so you can kind of consolidate the two. And that actually goes up to the repository that you threw up there. So I had all these notes, probably over 6 or 8 months, stuck in Logseek and Obsidian about Go. And I was like, these are like really refined, good notes that I've taken from a variety of sources, and they're just sitting here, only benefiting me in this repo. And so like that expression, I think, is the last part of the building the second brain.
Mm.
And also the Feynman technique, right, is to share it. And so what I've been doing over that time is finding a way to bring those notes to light in a way that is useful. And so that repository is kind of my attempt to find a way, at least with technical notes, to do that. And so you'll see there's a folder for web development, which has a bunch of stuff around templating and creating sessions. And I've been doing a lot of Elite code lately with Go and trying to learn algorithms and data structures to fill in some knowledge gaps. And so you'll see a folder for that. But the difference is that's all working code. So I'm spending more time in using or following the principle of directness, which is from the Scott Young's Ultra Learning book. So you want to do the thing and learn inside the context in which you're going to apply it. And so for me, that might be a coding interview. And so I should probably, Elite code is a good example of that. And then any kind of like notes to give context to that are left as comments in the code. And so that's where I've been about it. But I've shuffled, I've used Dendron to create nice hierarchy structures that link across. But I ultimately don't publish those for whatever reason. And so I've kind of moved more towards trying to make my reference system be public GitHub repositories, at least for code, or it's some kind of other public artifact. Like I haven't released any yet, but I've started recording YouTube videos on data structures and algorithms in Go. And so that'll kind of be that reference artifact, is that published, bringing it full circle and publishing that so I can reference it, but also get the rep and expressing that or making that, completing that cycle, so to speak, of the knowledge.
Yeah, it's a good point. I do want to kind of relate everything I know about Go repo to Kubernetes and what we all came here to hear about. But first, I really want to ask on the topic of expression. I think for me at least, expressing in terms of writing a permanent note or writing something that will be relatable and will allow others to understand what I'm saying and to share that information in a way that's kind of applicable for I'm obviously talking about the Kubeskills community and trying to have everyone learn Kubernetes and express knowledge that's applicable to a lot of different people. And so I've realized through that process that it's really when it comes down to expressing for others and putting that information out there to the public, and this goes along with like making YouTube videos and authoring a book and all of those things. So my question to you is, in your expression, just taking out that expression part of code, how have you realized that kind of making this information available to the public? You have a lot of YouTube videos on your YouTube channel that speak about this, but do you notice that your expression gets much better over time if you're kind of going live on a video, or if you're putting this out into the world and people are viewing it? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So definitely, the quality over quantity, you'll get better. And the reason, I think it's kind of a personal thing too. So like, I don't think that there's anything wrong if you want to build like a really elaborate personal knowledge base and it's for you and you navigate and it's your personal Google. I've certainly done that. But for me, there was this kind of like, I felt like I was leaving all these things incomplete by not sharing them. And I think that's just kind of a personality trait that I have. But what comes with that is the opportunity for feedback. So some of the cracking the code interview stuff that I did, I put it up on Reddit. So you immediately know that you're just going to get destroyed,
Yeah.
because I'm by no means like a super awesome software engineer or something like that. And so my solution was pretty rudimentary, right? And so it just got torn to shreds by a lot of really good software engineers, but I learned a lot. So there's an element of vulnerability that you have to accept when you go to that final stage, but it also gives you a tremendous opportunity, both for feedback, but also for impact. So if I go way back before even my note-taking journey, like a lot of the stuff on Duffney.io is really just career. Some of it's a lot of PowerShell stuff, but then it kind of moved into like just career journey type stories, that I've had a lot of fantastic feedback, and people have gotten a lot of value from those posts. And so had I not taken the time to like fully distill that thought and to share it in some kind of a forum, then I wouldn't have gotten that opportunity to see that like the impact that that's had. But it does give you the reps, right? So whatever medium, and that's why you mentioned like a bunch of different things that I've done over the last 18 months. Like I've written books, I've done YouTube videos, I've done video courses, I've done Pluralsight courses, I've done blog posts, I've done articles, I've done essays. And so like, I'm still very much in flux of like trying to find what medium it is that I most enjoy, that I would want to kind of stick with and refine. But amongst all that creation or content production, I've been able to refine my writing skills and video editing skills to at least an amateur level. And so you kind of get the benefit of that too, is refining those skills. And each one of those mediums, you're learning to be a better communicator. So there are sub skills that you learn through the expression, I think, that are super valuable.
Yeah, on that, on the topic of, being vulnerable, right? I always encourage people to, you know, create their first repo, put it out there in the world, and like you said, it's very important for getting feedback and learning and growing. But still, a lot of people are still hesitant. I guess, do you have any tips for those people who are still kind of on the fence about putting themselves out there, being vulnerable, and and anything like that?
I would say try to find a medium. So like if you don't want to be on camera, because that's the most nerve-wracking, then I would start with like warm yourself up to it. So it might be a blog post or just a GitHub repo or a gist or whatever it is, where you're trying to create that public presence, or a tweet or a LinkedIn post where you don't have to be on camera. I would say like writing is probably the more comfortable medium, even if you're not really good at it. Or just like a post on different, like on Reddit or those different platforms where there's lower friction and stuff like that is where I would start. And then you can kind of push yourself a little bit beyond your comfort zone. I wouldn't go from 0 to 60 and be like, I'm going to start a live stream. Live streams make me like super nervous, and something that I've avoided doing on my own channel for a long time, probably too long. But yeah, so I would say start with something that's moderately discomfortable, or, that you find discomforting, and then kind of push yourself through to the different ones, and leave yourself up to experimentation, and don't like lock yourself into like, oh, I did one blog post and now I got a blog for the rest of my career. Give yourself the latitude to experience different mediums and creation of different content creation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some people are better at on-screen stuff. Some people are better at writing. Some people are better at just audio. Really explore a little bit, I think, was the takeaway there. And also, I think you mentioned PowerShell. You've been a PowerShell community member and a part of that group for a while. Can you speak to some of the benefits of like joining a group like the PowerShell group, or Kubeskills group, or any small community that maybe alleviates some of those fears that you have, allows you to ask questions in a safe space, and allows you to really explore, through learning with friends in a community.
I always joke that I grew up in the PowerShell community, because I was, a couple of years into my career in tech, and I joined, and then, like they had all the big hitters like Richard Sidaway, Don Jones, and Jeff Hicks, who's still around doing good stuff in the PowerShell community. And then eventually, like I came like up into those brackets, not nearly as close to those. I didn't write any of the fantastic Month of Lunches books or anything like that. But the biggest benefit there is like you just get your rate of learning skyrockets, because you're constantly surrounded by people that one, willing to help you, and two, know more than you. And so that was the biggest boon that I got, is like you're surrounded by people that know more than you and that are willing to help you, and that's going to be a catalyst for your learning. And then it also created a safe space for me to write different things and to create things and to contribute. So eventually I think a lot of people, this started for me back in like Spiceworks community days, but eventually if you join a community, you're going to feel guilty when you just take, depending on your reciprocity style. Most people are matchers. And this is all context from a book by Adam Grant called Give and Take. So most people are matchers, some people are givers, very few people are takers. And if you join a community and you continually are receiving value, you're going to be compelled to give back in some way. And so that will kind of push you to contribute and to get in the game, so to speak, and to have some skin in the game.
Yeah, that's a good point. You kind of learn through osmosis in a way. Just surrounding yourself with smarter people, that's has an effect on you for sure. So we have a couple questions about using Obsidian, and I mean, from my experience, I would, if you're new to Obsidian, or I guess if you're new to personal knowledge management, and here I'll put up the question. So what are your thoughts on Obsidian? Is there a better choice? Possibly Notion. You said that you've tried the gambit, right? So do you have any particular advice for somebody who's looking for a PKM app?
Sure. So the first thing would be your familiarity with Markdown. So if you're like Markdown's a second nature to you, you're going to gravitate towards the different like tools like Obsidian. The biggest difference for me, in my view, Obsidian versus Notion is a project management tool. So if you were wanting to build a wiki, or you're trying to keep track of things and you're going to have some visibility between team members and stuff like that, Notion's really good to control, to express and to contain knowledge around a project or a team, like a team wiki. So very much like Jira would, or not Jira, Confluence would do for you. That would be kind of the use case for Notion. For me, it didn't work. I know a lot of people get like elaborate dashboards and stuff, but if I'm going to do that, I'd probably just use Trello or some kind of Kanban board to keep track of project work. Where Obsidian is different is it's a note-taking tool first. So it's more based on the file structure and the links and the notes. And so you're going to be it's going to be a lot easier to build a knowledge structure inside that tooling than it is going to be with Notion.
Cool. Yeah, I think as engineers, as a lot of us are in this community anyway, and we're kind of like thrown into things, learning on the fly, a lot of technical detail, a lot of code snippets, and model names, serial numbers, you name it. So I think for me, Obsidian has been really great. Like I said, I use the combination of LogSeq and Obsidian, but Obsidian has been great for me. I've always used Markdown, and kind of so that was kind of natural for me to make that transition. And then like I said before, creating these kind of these systems that in my mind are a lot like a folder hierarchy. And I haven't perfected the process. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I'm still, it's a day-to-day, ongoing thing where it's constantly trying to get better at writing notes. And, speaking of being vulnerable, I'm going to share my screen and try not to judge me too much on what my Kubernetes note-taking system looks like, but let's try this and see. I'm gonna share my screen here. And so can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
All right, so this is Obsidian, and I have on the left hand side here, I have all of my at the top I have what I hoped someday to be my complete slip box. And then, these are all of my, semi-permanent notes from LogSeq and other places. So I'd like to think that to me, it makes sense. It's kind of like, those people who have a messy room. It's like, but I know where everything is. So I don't have an issue. For me, that's kind of the same deal here, where I have one Kubernetes, file document. And I've created for myself, because this thing has gotten so long, a table of contents. So, for me, it's, this is the bad habit that I've been getting to, which I know this is not, for those at home, please do not, use me as a model by any means. But for me, I just click on CRDs, for example, and I go down to the CRD section of that same document. And so, as I scroll through this document, you could see that it's so enormously kind of bothersomely long. So Josh, do you have any tips for me, who's a kind of a teenager who has a messy messy room here, trying to clean up their note-taking system?
The most useful framework that I'd recommend anybody start with really is Tiago Forte's Building a Second Brain. So that's a fantastic book, and the reason I recommend that is because, unlike Smart Notes, it's not necessarily knowledge first, like bottom up. So they say bottom up knowledge, where you're kind of gathering knowledge and then eventually a knowledge structure emerges. A lot of us, especially people that are in engineering roles, don't operate that way. That's more academic thinking, where we operate as project first or project centric. And that's where Building a Second Brain is fully focused on. So the Building a Second Brain uses the PARA method, and PARA is project, area, resource or reference, and then archive is what that acronym stands for. And so the very first folder that you have is your project. And it makes it easy because in there, there were probably books that you were reading, or there were projects that you were on that those notes came from and were generated from. And so you could create a folder inside projects that says, whatever Kubernetes in action, or whatever the book may be, or whatever Kubernetes project. And it could even be a Jira card number. And then you start to throw your notes in there. And then as that project wraps up, you could either move that into, maybe you're a Kubernetes operator, and that would be an area. And so you would move the relevant notes there and kind of organize them. And then you could distill them. So instead of having a long list of all those things that you had in there, you would probably, like, whatever could fit on a screen, like one screen, like an index card is the mental model I always have, is kind of where you want to limit one particular note that can then be combined and built into a different hierarchy or what have you. So that way you could either search for them by name, or you could search for them by the link, and then they build together. And that's what there's many different names for it. There's a distill note, there's an atomic note, but some way to have, like, this note contains a specific unit of knowledge that I can either search for or combine with others. Like if I were to use a Go example, like a wrapapp function would be an example of a note that would be probably underneath the functions folder or something in reference, right? Eventually. But I probably would have stumbled upon that when I was doing a leak code problem and creating a linked list. And so this is just how you can capture and organize knowledge. But the Building the Second Brain PARA method is the best framework that I've come across for most people in engineering roles to use, because it creates a project first approach where you don't have to worry about the structure so much. You kind of go about your day, you complete projects, and then at the end of the day, you have knowledge that's contained in notes that you can then progress for building knowledge structures and capturing. So that's where I'd recommend. But I've been in your exact spot, and what I typically do is set everything on fire and start over. But that hasn't been the best thing, because I usually go back and find some things that are useful and pull them into the new system. But
Yeah, which leads me to the reason why I like that article. Note taking became a full-time job, so I stopped. So, in that, you describe that very process of making your full-time job, constantly going back and refining some of these systems that you've built. I guess, what was the breaking point for you, and when did you realize, like, oh my god, I'm spending like most of my day refining these systems? What was the breaking point?
when I stopped creating things, right? So when I ran out of energy to create things was the big indicator for me, because I always like to carry that to completion. It was starting to really weigh on me. I was like, I'm spending all this time building these elaborate notes and redoing the structure and moving them around constantly, and I create this, like, like I had probably a Go fundamentals book essentially mapped out in Obsidian and Logseq, but I didn't have a Go fundamentals book published. And nor did I have the energy to take those notes and convert them to a resource. And so they just started to lose their value, because I learned that most of the value in the note taking came from taking the note and not organizing the note. And so then that's kind of what shifted in my mind to where I kind of am now, where it's more lightweight, and I don't kind of obsess about the organization and stuff like that. And I'm very choosy about the things that I take that level of detailed notes on.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's so much effort that, if you put too much effort in, that kind of makes it not fun, right? You start to ruin
Yes.
ruin the fun, and you can't express, you can't, get out what you need to get out. You can't, you know, do the fun part, which for me is kind of sharing it with others and being able to kind of collaborate and share and grow. And
Well, and engineers want to build. And so like it prevented me from building something. And that was kind of the biggest, when I use create build, like they mean the same thing to me. So I wasn't creating or building anything. And so I just felt like very academic knowledge. And so that's my Twitter banner now, is a quote from Chris Pine: "Learn to program," which is programming isn't about what you know, it's about what you can figure out. And so I had accumulated this massive amount of knowledge about Go in this particular instance, but I didn't know how to build anything with it or do anything with it. Like I understood all the language syntax and all that and the idioms and things, but I wasn't putting the reps and practicing in directness of what it was that I was going to be doing with Go. And so then there was I had academic knowledge, but not practical knowledge. And that kind of ate at me as an engineer when I
yeah,
built
for
it.
sure. Yeah, it kind of stifles your productivity. And yeah, building is what we do. And if you're not actually, in a lot of ways, for me, it's like it's my job, right? I have to do it. I can't. Uh, I can't, unfortunately, can't sit there and research all day like a professor would, or what like a researcher would. So yeah, you have to make that kind of cut off there. So that's good, and that's a good kind of segue into talking about everything I know about Go, and everything or everything you know about Go, and relating that to Kubernetes. So this is finally getting into what everyone came here to learn about, which is taking those same aspects of you talked about, you had this buildup, I guess, of knowledge and of skills and of techniques and of tips and tricks that you learned that helped you learn Go, especially. So anything that sticks out in particular? I know that Go is a particularly complex topic, as is Kubernetes. So anything that you can glean from that process that maybe we can uh, you know cross streams here and apply to Kubernetes?
Absolutely. Well, we'll start with the why. So we've kind of been a little bit mean against the note taking because you can take it too far. But there's the other flip side, which is it's very useful in learning. And so there's a lot of different things that I've learned to increase my learning that were a result of this note taking research spike for me. Because on the flip side of that, if you're just reading through and you're not taking any notes, you're not actively reading or even doing any highlighting or underlining or anything like that, there's a lot of missed opportunity in that passive learning where you could turn into active and you can retain a lot more information. You can learn a lot more quickly. And so I'll kind of like walk through like how I would approach a new domain of knowledge and how I'd probably take notes a little bit differently now. But the first thing is a quote from The 4-Hour Chef by Tim Ferriss, which is material matters.
Mm.
So the very first thing that you want to do whenever you're approaching a topic like Kubernetes is to find like the best resources that you can. And that's usually through a peer review. So I'll find people such as Chad or other people that I know, like Michael Levan, and be like, that are super good with Kubernetes. Like, what should I start with? Like, what is the best resource, the one that leveled you up? Because there are different varieties or different levels of resources. And I like to find the ones that level, that bring you from zero understanding to like complete understanding or like competency. And so you want to vet those really high because you're going to sync. If it's a 500-page book, it's going to be a couple months. If it's a 11-hour video course, it's going to be at least a month. And so you're going to sink a lot of time into this, and you want to vet the quality. So the first thing would be is to make sure that you do like a little meta learning research spike and find the highest quality resources you can, and be willing to spend the money on those. And books are relatively cheap, and video courses are not too expensive these days. So that'd be number one. And then number two would be to change, like what I said prior, your learning from passive to active. And so you can do that in two different ways. So if I was to watch a video course, what I'll often do now is when there are key things or exercises, I will put questions in the notes of whatever tool that is, or in Logseek or whatever note-taking tool. A lot of times the platform like Pluralsight or Udemy will have a note-taking feature in there, and it's fine to have those questions inside that platform, because you won't, after you've gone through the exercises or taken the note on it or whatever, you won't need that question anymore. But there's a reason why I'm not just capturing what the person said that was important. I'm asking a question that they might ask to get me to say that information, so that way I have a better recall. So it's to test my recall of whatever that is. And that turning the video from just passively watching all the way through and then trying to do the exercise at the end really helps escalate my learning. And then if there's something like super valuable in that, like a design pattern or something, I would take it and put it into, would probably call a literature note, right? So I'd have a note, a markdown file that would be the name of the course. And I would just be putting in like what I found super, super relevant or interesting inside that note, and just capturing it all and usually categorizing it underneath the header of the chapter. So it's module 2, it'd be a header of module 2, and then the note would be under there. For reading, there's a great, I think I have a post called How to Read Well on the knowledgeworker.blog that kind of synthesizes this, but I got it from a book called How to Read a Book. And so there's different ways of reading textbooks. So if you're completely new to it, I'll just kind of briefly walk through the levels of reading, and then I'll kind of walk through how they mark up the book. And this, again, is for the purposes of taking something that was passive, where you're just reading, to making it active. So that way you retain more. So there's the elementary level of reading, which is just the ability to translate symbols into meaning. And then there's superficial reading and systematic reading, which is superficial is just you're reading through a book much like you would in a textbook form, but you're not stopping to pause for what you don't understand. You're just trying to get exposure to the ideas. And then there's analytical reading. Yep, great book right there. Where you start to break apart, you deep dive into it. You're trying to find the keywords and terms and stuff. And then there's syntopical reading, which is kind of reading multiple texts at once, but that's usually out of scope for what a lot of people do. Unless you're an expert in a domain, you don't have kind of the context to do that type of reading. But anyway, how you do the analytical reading and how you mark up a book is you can circle or underline key terms and words or paragraphs as you go through. And then at the end of the chapter, you go through and review. I mean, that's kind of standard. But one thing that I took away from that was to create a word list. So like at the end of each chapter, you kind of transfer all the keywords and terms, and you make sure that you know them. And again, this is just to make like the reading more active and fun, and make sure you do every single coding thing that you can or exercise in the books. So that's kind of how I'd approach the learning. And then as you go through and you've kind of accumulated that knowledge, you want to practice the principle of directness, which is to go and do the thing. So if they've got labs at the end of the book, or if you're supposed to build an app all the way through, like make sure you're doing that. And then at the end, change it in some way, whether that be putting it in a public repo and, instead of 6 pods, making it 8, instead of like a MySQL database, make it a non-relational database, like some kind of a change that makes you go through some of those actions a little bit deeper and make it your own. But you really have to interweave the practice in there to make it stick. But that's kind of how I would approach gathering the knowledge. And then after you've got those notes and those literature notes from several different sources, you could start to like reorganize them. Like if I were to reteach this to someone else, like how would I convey this knowledge and how would I structure it? And that all just kind of connects the knowledge and links it in your brain. But that's kind of how I approach new domains of knowledge now. I don't go so far down the Slipbox rabbit hole or note-taking, but I more so try to focus on making the actual learning more active and engaging, and then some kind of an artifact from that and building from that.
Yeah, that creates like an imprint in your memory, right? When you become an active learner And I think that's a really important thing to highlight here, is that when you either watch something or read something and you attach it to something that's meaningful for you, you attach a feeling to it almost. I think that that in itself becomes more permanent in your memory. And I know that people have said about my courses before, about my book, is that, you know, when I get done with the book, or if I finish the video, you know, I barely remember what I, what I started learning or at the beginning of the course. And so, you know, do you have any recommendations on what I hear about so often, which is, um, creating that mental imprint and being able to, like, if the book is 8 chapters, you're on chapter 8. How do you then create an imprint of your memory of chapter 1 or chapter 2, to where you're able to say, oh, I remember that from chapter 1, that relates to this. I know it has a lot to do with, good writing, and being able to summarize well, and create those labs like you said. But I guess for your own, like, if you have multiple sources, maybe how do you find those correlations, create that like mental map, you know what I mean?
A lot of it will come up. So if you're taking literature notes, you'll kind of stumble upon them. You'll be able to reference them. But a lot of times though, you just have to get comfortable that you know the knowledge, right? And you kind of, sometimes you can forget, and you should be okay with forgetting where that knowledge came from, because a lot of times, like, we don't have any citation requirements when we're writing code. That's kind of in the import. And so I would say, just get comfortable with knowing that you know it, right? Like, and so, like, the fact that you got to chapter 8 and it depended on knowledge in chapter 1 proves that you knew it. And so I would be more focused on what is it that you can build that captures that knowledge and understanding, versus being able to remember what that particular chapter did. Is taking that knowledge and then doing something with it is more important.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what I'd like to glean from that is, and this is for the audience, so instead of, repetitiously writing down line after line, or trying to go back and memorize lines, and trying to kind of regurgitate certain items from a book or from a course. I think what really helps me, and what I've seen help others as well, is going through that practical application of it. And that kind of goes back to our discussion about Express, right? You're teaching this back to either yourself or other people, and you're you're setting it into a concrete area of your brain, because it's an action that you're taking that's kind of cementing that in your memory. And the reason why that's helpful, I think, is because you're taking what you know and you're applying it to something. It has more of a substantial value, right, than words on a page, or something that you heard that one time. So I think that's a really I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a really important thing. So, on that, what kind of things did you do in learning about Go that kind of helped in that, creating that kind of concreteness?
So two things that I would highly recommend that people lean more into is copywork and reverse engineering. So copywork in the sense of, like, I, for the longest time, struggled to build anything with Go, because I was like, well, I don't want to just walk through the paces of what someone else did. I don't think that's very valuable. But what that does give you, especially when you're in a completely different domain, you don't have any context, is it gives you tools to be able to build certain different things. And so that definitely applies in Kubernetes. Like, even as a Kubernetes operator, it's still not your responsibility or your domain or even discipline to write the microservices and the web apps that are running on the cluster. And, like, that's a full, like different college degree, different discipline, decades of experience to be able to write something beyond like a really horrific HTML and CSS thing, which is what I'm capable of doing today. You can dabble in that, but like where I got hung up is thinking that everything that I wrote needed to be original. And so that there's a great value in just using someone else's solution where they're like go through and do the paces of like spinning up the Docker container and scaling it out. And for me, that would have been like writing a CLI app and copying every single line. Because then when you do that, you can start to find like, oh, it'd be nice if this did this a little bit differently. And then you go and change that and everything breaks. And then you have an opportunity to do some reverse engineering, which is every engineer or operator's like probably best skill, because that's what we've had to do since day one. We just get thrown in, we have to figure it out, and then we have to reverse engineer everything until we understand. And so doing Copywork gives you an opportunity to do that. That was actually the biggest boon in my growth for Go, was when I started to reverse engineer the LeetCode problems, because they abstract the data structures and those things from you, and I had to go and rebuild them to get them to run locally, because they just kind of like took that and ran it behind the scenes. But then I had to learn about the structs and the pointers and all that at a deeper level than I had just going through the academic material. And I think the same thing would be true if you were to go through and try and like reverse engineer or build out some kind of like lab that a book walks you through for Kubernetes. So Copywork and reverse engineering are your friends. So gather the minimum academic knowledge that you can to understand the terms and understand concepts, and then start diving into redeploying other people's labs, and then trying to reverse engineer and alter it if you can, because that's going to have a far deeper, it'll deepen your understanding way more than just picking up another book will.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Kind of almost like presenting problems for yourself to get through, obstacles that kind of force you into this problem solving mode, that through that problem solving journey, or like you said, setting up something locally or what have you, kind of forces that learning upon you, and kind of makes you, um, adds to your experience, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I always think about Kubernetes in buckets. I don't know if this is common for other folks, but so I try to separate. Maybe this is going back to my kind of engineering brain, where I kind of like put everything into buckets or folders or whatever, or directories. So I try to separate it into API, storage, troubleshooting, applications or running applications. So deployments and or stateful sets and or pods, and then um, there's one other one, networking. So those are the 5 buckets that I put Kubernetes in. And so I usually make this suggestion, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, or maybe you can kind of elaborate on this, or maybe you have a better way. I'd love to hear what you think about the process of putting those things in those buckets. Like in my mind, I have this kind of Gantt chart, right, where you have all these in a at the top of a column, and then you're kind of going deep into the bucket, but also figuring out how these buckets relate to each other, and kind of drawing lines to different buckets, and kind of creating that map, mind map. So I guess, what do you think about that? Or how, have you, in your process of learning Go, have you developed anything that's different or alternative, um, or anything like that?
No, I think it's natural. I like to use, so I used to play a lot of video games when I was younger, and so I like to use a lot of analogies. So the fog of war is kind of like my favorite analogy. That's a Warcraft and Starcraft analogy, where you can't see the map, right? And so like what you're describing is like you've run your units all across the map, and so you've discovered these little pockets, right? So here's Kubernetes, and there's like kind of like the focal point, but then there's these little camps over here, and here's networking over here, and here's storage, and you can, because you understand kind of the basics and how the system all works together, you're able to better segment and say like, okay, I need to go deeper into networking because I only know this far. Or like this is when I would need to know more about networking or something like that, over storage, right? Like what type of app do you have, and does it need to have stateful storage and stuff like that. You kind of explored that, but someone coming in is going to be like, they're going to need to have context for those different areas. Like, like you couldn't just go in and go learn Kubernetes networking without learning kind of the Kubernetes fundamentals. It won't make as much sense. So I think that's kind of a natural progression as you just get more and more competent with whatever that domain of knowledge is. And if you were to keep notes and to build a slipbox, you would actually start to see that laid out, and it would look very much like the table of contents for a book. So I think that's a perfect way to go about doing that and racking into your brain. But I also, anyone starting in the field, there you kind of like what I was trying to get to with the superficial learning, where you kind of just reading through and you're trying to get awareness, and that's where you should start. It's like, I just want to understand this, like the terms and the key concepts, like, and read through the book as if not like a textbook where you need to fully understand every single page. It's totally fine to breeze through it just to get like kind of a loose figure, right? So in StarCraft, there's a particular thing that the humans can do where they can kind of use radar or whatever satellite to temporarily explore space, and that's kind of like what the superficial reading does. Is it just kind of like briefly introduces you and gets you to see like, oh, there's this networking concept, and it's useful when pods need to talk to each other or something like that. And so it's really just giving you context for deepening your learning. But that's where I'd start, is just kind of like exploring, getting used to the terms and the space and how things are set up. And then you can start to dive and build those deeper expertise as you kind of go along.
Yeah. So you've obviously learned a bit about Kubernetes, and can you tell us about your learning journey in learning Kubernetes, and how you tried to tackle that, and how far did you make it, or did you notice anything that somebody can glean from this talk that we're having now that could help them, maybe if they're I don't know, if they're like stuck on a certain concept, or they're you just talked about learning the terminology, getting to know all these concepts like pods and deployments and all the terminology. But anything else that you can glean from, because it's such a complex topic, it's really hard for people to stick with it, because there's so many layers of abstraction sometimes that you get caught up in that, and it's really hard for somebody to see, okay, like, this is too hard. Like, there's so many people that I've worked with in the past that have just been like, Kubernetes, like, why is this so complicated? I just want to ping my server, or I just want to use ncat without going through the network namespace and all that kind of stuff. So any other, I guess, tips that you can give as we kind of close out here, to learning Kubernetes in general?
I think you can have a really good why. That's probably why a lot of people stop. So that's actually why I stopped, is I didn't have the need for it anymore when I switched from being the S3 at SecFlow and doing the technical writing. I just didn't need to know those things, and that's why I stopped. So you really have to have a why. Is it a job that you want, or are you practicing for the certification, or gearing yourself up for it? So you're going to have to give yourself some kind of a carrot, because it is complex. Or is it like, do you want to run an app? So having a good why would be my first recommendation. And then the second one would be scope. So like, really, like, are you aiming for just fundamental knowledge? Are you trying to solve a particular problem? Are you trying to get this different job, and it requires a particular set of skills? And so trying to find out whatever that filter is to reduce the scope. Because if you just say like, I want to master Kubernetes, like, that's like, are you going to contribute to Kubernetes? Are you going to write back to the open source? Like, that's a whole different game. Do you just need to know how to operate it? Do you need to know like how to do stateful storage, so that way you can get some adoption for Kubernetes in your organization? And so asking, that with the why question, I think would be the best bet. And then once you kind of solve that problem, you can pivot and repeat that and iterate on it. But without those two things, it's going to be difficult to kind of stay the course, because it's just such a broad topic and domain.
Yeah, I would agree that why has to be pretty strong to really hang in there. Yeah, and I have heard that before. It's like, it's such a buzzword, right? Kubernetes is such a buzzword that you can easily jump on the bandwagon, but you have to have that reason, whether it's your boss is telling you have to learn it, or there's this certification that you want to get to possibly get you a better job or a promotion or another, transfer skill sets or what have you. So yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that's a really good thing to kind of hone in on as we close out here, is just kind of knowing why you're doing it. And then there's a lot of whys, that you could grasp onto, if you're listening. So there's, special interest groups, we call them SIGs, that you could contribute to. And a lot of times being a part of those groups, helps you learn through osmosis, like you did with the PowerShell group. um, you know there's our group Kubeskills, which helps, you kind of get the ball rolling in terms of learning Kubernetes, and being a part of kind of that small safe group that you feel like you can ask questions. Um, and contributing, you mentioned contributing, so that's a big part of it too. I think Kubernetes being an open source project, they place a high importance on contributing. So I would definitely look into that. And I actually have a link to a contributor cheat sheet that I'd like to share with you. Speaking of contributing, and so if you want to know how to contribute, how do I get involved in this thing called Kubernetes, and how do I contribute to a project or a SIG or anything, please check that out. But yeah, I just want to close out with, just asking you, Josh, what's been going on lately? What have you been working on? Anything particularly interesting that you could share with us here before we leave?
So trying to apply the Go knowledge a little bit more. So I've been tinkering with building some web services, and so that'll probably be more what shows up in that everything I know about Go repo, and then dabbling with data sources or data structure and algorithms. And then kind of more work related, I've been diving into Kubernetes more. So I'll probably be poking around the Kubernetes space even more and more in the near future.
Nice. And I know you're an avid reader, so what are you reading right now?
I am reading a book called Pivot, and so it's kind of about like how to take different steps in your career and stuff like that, which is pretty interesting. And then the next one on my list is Mastery by Robert Greene. So that should be good.
Nice. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining today. I hope it was helpful to all of you listening, to get some tips and tricks on learning Kubernetes, how to kind of, start off, organize your knowledge. And we talked about a lot of stuff, mostly related to personal knowledge management, and how to start using some of these note-taking apps, and all that. But I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight in kind of summary here is that I think reducing friction is very important for getting your ideas on paper, or on some of these note-taking apps, or on somewhere digitally. And then being able to express that in some form, whether you're teaching another person, maybe your colleague, or maybe your family member. And then that expression part, I think, was something that I gleaned from this. And also being able to take complex topics like Go, like Kubernetes, and really trying to break those down. We talked about learning the terminology, and learning kind of the basics before you dive deep into a particular topic. And then most importantly, I think, is having a why. So yeah, I hope everyone got some valuable knowledge out of this. Thanks again, Josh, for joining. I really appreciate your time. It was really exciting for me, and it was great to talk to you.
My pleasure.
And if you haven't already, check out Josh's videos on YouTube. And we mentioned his YouTube page earlier. And check out how you can get started with using Obsidian, and check out his book, How to Take Smart Notes in Obsidian, which is really cool for trying to get that more permanent notes and more, being able to retain knowledge and being able to reference it and being able to go through that process of capture, organize, distill, express. So that I will leave you with that. Again, kubeskills.com. If you want to join our community, everyone is welcome. It's truly a safe space and really a great community of people who are really excited about learning Kubernetes and really excited about helping other people grow and learn. And that's really the focus of this chat with you, Josh, and also kind of my mantra and my personal mission. So I appreciate you adding to that.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. And everyone have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. See ya.